got cut off when we were talking about the issue of is Descartes a good guy or a bad guy overall?
Oh, okay. Let's redo that because I do have a question about that. Because did I tell you I'm reading this. I'm reading a series of novels. I think there are 8 novels. I think I'm on novel number 7, called the Baroque Cycle, and it kind of covers Europe from 1780 to 1716, and it primarily is focused on some of the disputes between Leibniz and Newton. But around that, it builds an entire world of characters, all dealing with the politics and the Enlightenment discussions and debates going on at the time. So it's kind of fascinating. And of course, Descartes comes up a lot because Descartes is part of that discussion. I think he's not alive anymore, but a lot of what's happening is on the basis of some of the work he did. And to what extent, so here's my question, then you can integrate it with, I guess, the rest of it. To what extent is Descartes responsible, at least on the positive side, for breaking away from strictly religious thought, right? In a sense, bringing philosophy back, asking important questions, even if his answers are wrong, and setting the stage for the rest of the Enlightenment?
I would say he's part of a series of figures, and I think of Bacon, Descartes, and Locke as the 3 main ones here, and they come in that order historically.
Yeah.
And so maybe Bacon and Descartes are the first 2 because Locke very much is influenced by at least Descartes and probably Bacon, who have a few important things in common. And these important things in common, in my view, are all to the good. And then what distinguishes Descartes from the bunch, is unfortunately to the bad. But they are, first of all, they're anti-scholastic, they're anti-establishment. There's a whole university structure and way of getting credentialed and things that you're supposed to know, and it's all a lot of arguments from authority. And there is a lot of, by this time, Aristotle is very much integrated into the curricula. So it's not like they're just, saying stuff mystically. They're giving arguments for a lot of it, but it's very much in a kind of hidebound traditionalist way. And the arguments are to, a lot of the argumentation in this scholastic tradition is to use a phrase Harry Binswanger used in another context to describe modern academia. It's minutia seeking, this kind of quibbling about little petty details or something. And so Descartes and Bacon and Locke, they're all sort of writing separate from that. They're not, they've been through university, they have degrees, they know the kind of basic stuff. They thought, and in fact, I'm as smart as these guys, I'm as smart as the teacher. I could have been, and Descartes says this in his book, I could have been admitted to become a teacher at the same university, but I just, I don't buy it, right? And so they're going their own way, they're doing a different thing, they're kind of breaking with the tradition, and a tradition that's very authority-based. Mm-hmm. And very much has a feeling of like there are certain people who are geniuses and they learn the stuff and now they know the lore and they're qualified to pass it on to the next generation. And they're very much challenging received wisdom, thinking a lot of this stuff is BS. There's nothing so crazy to think that you can't find some ancient text that is arguing for it, and the arguments usually aren't that good. And there are people in our generation and every generation who are as smart as the people of ancient times. And we shouldn't be kind of beholden to them. We shouldn't be perpetual students of the ancients. We should be breaking out on our own and trying to figure out what's true. And it's possible for anybody to figure out what's true if you have the right method. So what you see as a theme in a lot of these texts is, it's not that you have some special innate ability. It's not that distinguishes you from other people. It's not that something's been revealed to you that hasn't been revealed to other people. You just got to find the right method and do it the right way. And Descartes says, if I've seen more, it's because and Descartes had some real discoveries in mathematics, right? So he has some laurels to rest on. It's not that I'm a special genius or I had the best teachers. It's I came upon the right method. And if you follow this method, you'll have good results too. Mm-hmm. And you can tell that they're true for yourself. You don't have to take it on my authority. So the idea of there's a method, you can use your own judgment independently. Everybody's able to do it. And all you have to do is put the work in and you can get knowledge. So that's, I think, something in common among these 3. Again, Bacon, Newton, Locke, Descartes. Bacon, Descartes, Locke. common to these three, and also common to them is that the method is what we call foundationalist. There's the idea that there's certain basic knowledge that everyone can tell is true. It forms the foundation of knowledge, and then we're going to build other knowledge up on this basis. And more than just being foundationalist, it also aspires to a kind of depth of understanding that some of the later thinkers who were also foundationalists didn't have. They're not just like, we can sort out the appearances and kind of predict them. They're aiming at like real science where you understand things deep down from causes. And all three of these thinkers have this. They think you could do it in different domains, and all of that is good. But when you think about what's distinctive to Descartes, particularly in the context of there are other thinkers like Bacon who have all that stuff and who are prior to Descartes, it's two things. One is a certain method for identifying the foundations of knowledge, the method of doubt, where you come up with extravagant skeptical scenarios, and then you try to show, I could show there's something I would know even in this crazy scenario. The skeptical scenarios people had been doing before him, but Descartes had this idea, I'll find a foundation for knowledge by finding something that even if I conjure up the most arbitrary skeptical scenario I can, the most extreme one, I would still be able to know that I exist. And that's, his foundation of knowledge. So that's one thing that's distinctive to him. And another is what he gets as a result of this, which is what we can call what's often called the prior certainty of consciousness. The idea that the fact that you are conscious is for you not only a basic piece of knowledge, a kind of axiom, which he's right to think it is, and maybe one of the first to identify, but not only that, it's an axiom, and the existence of anything independent of you is not. It's something you have to reason to from first knowing that you're conscious. And Locke, unfortunately, inherited that idea from Descartes, and the whole early modern tradition gets off, I think, on the wrong foot with this idea, because they're, in effect, all trying to start with the contents of their own experience and prove that a world exists apart from them. And you get something kind of along the lines of the problems we were talking about in the video we were looking at the other day. So I think all of that is really bad and really undercut something that was tremendously positive in this tradition, namely the focus on method and the focus on foundations. And it's worth noting those things are in Bacon without this primacy of consciousness element. So
can you say a little bit about Francis Bacon and why Descartes is so much more well-known than I think Bacon is?
Bacon, my sense is, had a large influence on the early scientific revolution.
Okay.
And exactly what the strands are and so forth, it would be, I don't know enough to trace, but I think people read him, and I think he had an influence on the experimental method. And so I don't think he kind of died on the vine, so to speak. Yep. But in terms of the main philosophical tradition, Locke certainly was influenced by Descartes. Hume and Leibniz and all of these kind of people come out of Cartesian thinking. And I'm not sure why that is, possibly because Descartes was more interested in proving things about the mind that led to that, although Descartes didn't write much on ethics, a little, but were related to questions of the immortality of your soul and the kinds of specifically philosophical questions that that we think of him more as a main figure in the history of philosophy, and we think of what came out of Bacon as more part of the history of science.
Yeah. Good. And just because I'm curious, where do you put Spinoza in that kind of sequence?
He's in the Cartesian kind of strand, I would say. He's similar to Leibniz. He's one of these kinds of thinkers. And I don't know, I'm not an expert at all in Spinoza, and I don't know to what extent he would have engaged with Bacon, but it's very rationalistic. It's not experimental. It's not about, but there are some really good ideas in it, particularly about freedom of religion, as there are in Locke.
Yep.
It's, I think of Spinoza as a...
He knew firsthand.
Yeah,
Spinoza knew firsthand what freedom of religion, or lack of freedom of religion, meant.
And I think of Spinoza as sort of a rebirth of Stoicism in some respects, where certainly in his ethics and in some of his metaphysics, even the idea of one nature that's God and they're somehow identical. What's distinctive about Bacon in his method is, even though he's a heavy critic of Aristotle, it's essentially Aristotelian in the idea that you build up from sense perception to principles that explain broad amounts of sensual perceptual material. And he's specifically contrasting himself to both empiricists and rationalists. Empiricists who are too just about the appearances and predicting appearances, and rationalists who have these floating abstraction principles that they don't really get from experience. And his criticism of Aristotle is he's basically a rationalist. He says he gets the principles from experience, thinks Bacon, but he looks around and he jumps to some huge, highly abstract principle. There's form and matter or whatever. And Bacon thinks you have to really be careful to go up in small steps and eventually get to these overarching principles. So I think Bacon's a figure that deserves a lot more study. He's someone who I've, keep meaning to read more of than I have. And there's a whole interesting history coming from him. So there's his influence on the early scientific revolution. Then there are these 19th century thinkers, Whewell is one of them and Babbage is another, who kind of tried to revive Bacon and get his, get a kind of revival of interest in him. There's an interesting book by Laura Snyder, The Philosophical Breakfast Club, about this group who got together and on Sunday mornings, I think it was, read Bacon and tried to put it into practice. And it's an interesting book on this episode in history.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it seems like there was a lot of that. These kind of salons, philosophical salons. There was a lot of, particularly in the 17th century and 18th century, a lot of, some of them had to hide the fact because some of it was illegal, like reading Spinoza for a while was illegal in many places. And there were all these underground books smuggling. And that period is just fascinating because people were, it's almost like the rebirth of a mind, people starting to think and break out of the conventional wisdom. And a lot of it's happening underground, and libraries are formed for the first time in modern, kind of in the modern West. It really, we need some more historians who specialize in that era, because I think it's fascinating.
And to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize, I know this is difficult, can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy? What is Randism?
First of all, I do not call it Randism, and I don't like that name. I call it objectivism.
All right.
Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute, that man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it, and that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality which has so far been believed impossible, namely a morality not based on faith.
On faith?
Not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason, a morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary.
All right, all right.
Now, may I define what my morality is?
All right.
Because this is merely an introduction. My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value. And since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, by which I mean that he has to hold reason as his only guide to action, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him, that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
May I?
All right, before we go on, reminder, please like the show. We've got 163 live listeners right now, 30 likes. That should be at least 100. I figure at least 100 of you actually like the show. Maybe there are like 60 of the Matthews out there who hate it, but at least the people who are liking it, you know, I want to see a thumbs up. There you go. Start liking it. I want to see that go to 100. All it takes is a click of a thing, whether you're looking at this, and you know, the likes matter. It's not an issue of my ego. It's an issue of the algorithm. The more you like something, the more the algorithm likes it. So, you know, and if you don't like the show, give it a thumbs down. Let's see your actual views being reflected in the likes. But if you like it, don't just sit there. Help get the show promoted. Of course, you should also share, and you can support the show at JeronBrooksShow.com/support, or on Patreon or Subscribestar or Locals, and show your support for the work, for the value hopefully you're receiving from this. And of course, don't forget, if you're not a subscriber, even if you just come here to troll, or even if you're here like Matthew to defend Marx, then you should subscribe, because that way you'll know when to show up. You'll know what shows are on, when they're on. You'll get notified, right? So, yes, like, share, subscribe, support. Like, share, subscribe, support. There you go. Easy. Do one or all of those, please.